We're looking at whether President Obama is at risk of repeating what some critics have said is a mistake he made in his first term. One columnist writing in USA Today that Mr. Obama alienated the GOP with his stimulus package when he first took office. Jonah Goldberg writes, rather than work with Republicans, Obama colluded with Democratic leaders in the House and Senate to propose a stimulus Republicans had no authorship of and no confidence in. He goes on to write, quote, fast forward to 2012, it looks as if the White House is trying to repeat its mistakes all over again. Joining us now, the author of that column, Jonah Goldberg, editor-at-large of the National Review. He is also a Fox News contributor. So if the White House does repeat those mistakes, Jonah, what do you think the net effect is?
Well, the sounds of kumbaya from your earlier report are all heartening and wonderful, and let's hope they can get into a drum circle and be happy. But the way they've dealt with this so far has been to push the Republicans further away, harden their positions, and to basically refuse to take yes for an answer. And the Republicans immediately after the election said, we're going to give on this revenue thing, we're going to have to raise revenues. The question is, how are we going to do it? And the Obama administration, almost like a character from Seinfeld, said, we're going to do this out of spite, and said we want to have to raise the rates rather than do this loophole closing thing and all of the rest. And the problem with that is that presidents get very few do-overs, and one of the few that they get is right after an election, they can change the tone, they can sort of start over, and instead of doing that and trying to figure out how to fulfill this promise that Obama has always made about being bipartisan, he's decided to sort of do the same thing he did with the stimulus, which is to try to steamroll the Republicans, to crush them, to placate his base, and it has the potential to create another 4 years of partisan hammer and tong fighting in Washington.
I wanted to get your reaction to what the Treasury Secretary had to say in that report from Mike Emanuel a minute ago. He was asked, flat out, is the White House ready to go over the fiscal cliff? And boom, he says, absolutely, as if that's a good thing. I mean, there are defense contractors who are going to be laying off workers. There are all kinds of negative ramifications to all of this, but the White House apparently is ready to take the jump.
Well, they're certainly ready to say it. Look, the Republicans have a weaker hand than I thought they would originally have about a couple months ago. But the idea that President Obama wants to start his second term by plunging the country into a recession, a huge sell-off in the stock market, and by being perceived as generally sort of willing to play chicken with the economy doesn't sound like a brilliant political move to me.
You think that's all talk?
I think it's a game of chicken. I really do. I think that the Republicans would probably get a lot of blame in the beginning, and that's maybe what they're thinking of, and they're trying to scare the Republicans. But over the long term, there's just no way this administration wants to go over the fiscal cliff. Whether they're willing to or not, or willing to be the ones to turn the wheel last is possible. But the idea that they're fine with the idea just strikes me as preposterous.
You write that the news media is essentially biased against Republicans, and that any conservative idea that wins here is not going to gain a lot of favor. So is it a case in which Republicans are sort of damned if they do and damned if they don't?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of been the theme of the last 4 years, is that Republicans basically can't win. But part of what I proposed in that column was basically the Republicans should have a fallback position of basically adopting or proposing the Bowles-Simpson plan, which was President Obama's own hand-picked deficit reduction commission, where they proposed closing loopholes and lowering tax rates, which is the Republican position, and in part just to simply see how can the New York Times or the Washington Post denounce the Republicans for picking the sort of pristine example, the poster child of bipartisan, centrist policymaking that we've had in the last 4 years, and it would put a lot of pressure on Obama. But that's part of the problem the Republicans have, is they're working in a climate where whatever they propose, the idea that what they're proposing is ridiculous or extreme gets a lot more oxygen than I think it deserves.
Jonah Goldberg, who writes for USA Today and the National Review. Jonah, thank you.
Hey, great always to be here. Thank you.
You bet.